Hi, I'm Shelley from the St. Paul Intervention Project, and I would like to welcome everyone here today. This is an annual event that we do, and we do it for us and the hard work we all do. So to keep things moving, I am very proud and pleased to introduce one of our fiercest people that keep the domestic violence in the forefront in our city, Mayor Chris Coleman.
Thank you, everyone. I'll see if this works here with that just on the stand. Thank you all for coming out to our annual recognition and event to bring awareness to a problem that continues to plague our communities across Minnesota, communities across the country and across the globe. The crime of domestic abuse is rarely a single isolated event. It's a life-threatening crime that imprisons its victims through intimidation, emotional abuse, and physical violence. It's a problem that does not solely belong to its victims, a specific culture, or the unfolding of particular circumstances. It's a problem that is overwhelmingly entrenched in our community as a whole. As of late, we've been surrounded by stories of domestic violence from across the country and around the world. The prevalence and intensity of these crimes can be daunting. That's why we must always take a moment and remind ourselves of how much we have accomplished, which is why we are here today. The City of St. Paul and Ramsey County have been leaders in recognizing that domestic abuse is a public safety, public health, and human rights issue. As a community, we've been cognizant that domestic violence is entwined with the healthy development of children and adolescents, the equality of women, and all members of our society having access to services and protection they deserve. We know that in order to end this horrendous crime, each one of us must become a part of the solution. It's from that basis we have collaboratively developed models that have created passages to safety across the nation and created opportunities for healthy, long-term societal change. It's a unique community that we have here that really brings together the partnerships that are necessary to address this problem. We have made great progress, but we're a long ways from finding an ultimate solution. We need to continue to bring our best efforts forward. We need to continue to partner. We must continue to demonstrate and to lead other communities in this country and show by our efforts our commitment to ending the problem of domestic violence. It affects far too many of our families in every corner of the city, and it is our responsibility to step up to the plate and do everything that we can. Thank God I've been a part of a leadership team that has included our chief, our sheriff, our council members, our county board, and the next speaker, my city attorney, Sarah Gruen.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here. Whoa, everybody okay? You know, 4 years ago we started doing this and gathering every October to talk about Domestic Violence Awareness Month and to thank our partners who are in the trenches every day on this important issue. And I remember 4 years ago there was this moment where we realized that the head of every criminal justice agency in St. Paul had turned over in the span of about 8 weeks. So between Sheriff Bostrom, County Attorney Choi, the chief, and myself, we were all new in our jobs 4 years ago. And I hope what you've seen in the last 4 years is that our commitment to eradicating domestic violence in this community is unwavering and unshakable. My brothers in criminal justice here will say the same thing to you in person as they say when the cameras aren't here, and that their commitment to this issue is real and it's very powerful. And to be ending domestic violence at this time, to be working towards ending domestic violence in this moment, in this community, is really powerful, because the four of us together with the elected officials who support us is really a wonderful and important opportunity to make real change happen in this area. Similarly, I want to acknowledge and thank my colleagues who are here today working to make justice happen for our victims in the city of St. Paul. Deputy City Attorney Laura Peaton, Tammy Larson, and Jim Jersky work very hard on this issue every day and do an extraordinary job for the city. You all know that our commitment in the St. Paul City Attorney's Office is more than just about being a signature on the protocols laid out in the St. Paul Blueprint for Safety. We are committed each day to walking the talk of those blueprint principles and protocols. For us, that means asking every day if we are maintaining our laser focus on reducing lethality and holding offenders accountable. This year, that's meant working with the Ramsey County Attorney's Office on the creation of the Joint Special Victims Unit and the efforts to hone our partnerships for those cases that demonstrate serious risk of future harm. Walking the talk of the blueprint this year has also meant asking the tough questions about the possible unintended consequences of our protocols and practices and the impact that they have on victims and our families. Looking at each case in the context of risk, rather than a one-size-fits-all model, has enabled us to shape a justice system that truly protects our victims by taking into consideration the individual's risk of danger and the needs of the family, without ever compromising victim safety or perpetrator accountability. We couldn't ask those questions, as Assistant Chief Axtell would say, without having built up a bank of trust with the people in this room. We know each other, we trust each other, and we share the same commitment to protecting victims and holding offenders accountable. Finally, walking the talk of the blueprint this year has meant turning inward, bringing in national experts to refresh and hone our protocols with regard to the prosecution of domestic violence, routinely auditing our own files to ensure that we are considering all of the ramifications of lethality factors, and being open to constructive feedback about how we can and must do better for our victims. So again, thank you all for being here today and for continuing to walk the talk of the blueprint with us. As the late Sheila Wellstone would remind us if she were here, and as the national headlines of the past few weeks would tell us, our work is far from over. We can and must do more to form a just society. For as Sheila Wellstone said in 1995, we really have to look at the values that guide us, and we have to work towards an ethic that respects every individual, to be physically and emotionally safe. That is ultimately what our goal is, to understand that no one, regardless of age, color, gender, background, or any other factor, deserves to be physically or emotionally unsafe. We need to do everything we can to respect that safety and everything we can to protect it. In a just society, we come together with a common goal of making sure that everyone is safe. In a just society, we are not going to tolerate the violence, and we are going to be a part of the fundamental change of attitude that is going to stop that cycle of violence. Thank you all for working to create that society that Sheila Wellstone envisioned. And thank you for all the work you do to save the lives of victims and their families, and for being here today. It's now my great privilege to introduce my colleague and predecessor as City Attorney, County Attorney, John Choi.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everybody. It's always a pleasure to be with all of you as we gather, typically in the month of October, to remember the victims of domestic violence, but also to pause and take a moment to think about the progress that we have made around many of the changes that have happened as a result of the St. Paul Blueprint for Safety and the great things that our community and our advocacy organizations have been doing for a very, very long time. But at the same time, we're always reminded that, as Sarah said, our work is really never done in this area. And in fact, over the past year, I've done a lot of reflection about the nature of violence, sexual violence, domestic violence that happens in our community. In fact, you could take Target Field, so imagine yourself at Target Field, and you could fill that baseball stadium 17 times over. And that would represent all of the women today that are living in the state of Minnesota that have been a victim of sexual assault, domestic violence, and stalking. It's an extraordinary amount of people. And oftentimes our victims aren't reporting those instances to law enforcement. But if you think about the numbers that we're talking about, we have to start thinking about how is it that we stop this cycle and this really big public health issue that we have. And I think that oftentimes the solutions are sometimes amidst the problems. And what I'm talking about is the vast majority of the perpetrators in sexual assault, domestic violence, stalking are men. And I'm not trying to indict men, but what I'm saying is that as we think about this issue, I think that we should have this conversation about how we engage more men around this issue. It's so great to see so many great progressive men and supporters of domestic violence prevention in this room, but we need to go further, and we need to think about how we raise our boys in the context of all of this. And so that's something that I'm going to be focusing on to try to use the position of my power working with all of you in the advocacy community and the public to really start that conversation. Because I believe that because of all of the socialization in our culture, it contributes to all of this violence. If you think about, if anybody in this room, if you're over the age of 50, I bet you probably remember when your parents were driving their cars and they didn't have seatbelts on, right? And I'm 44 and I remember my parents not having seatbelts on. But ultimately today, everybody has their seatbelt on. And I think that's the culture change that we really need to see happen around violence against women, violence against children. So I want to thank all of you for being here today, for all the work that you do. I want to thank all of my colleagues and partners in the criminal justice system for just the tremendous thing that we got going here in St. Paul and Ramsey County. I was just at a conference of prosecutors, statewide prosecutors, and everybody wants to talk to me about the St. Paul Blueprint for Safety because it's incubating all over the state. I was just talking to a prosecutor in Winona, and she's so excited about doing what's been happening in St. Paul. And so we've done just really tremendous work together. And so I want to thank all of you for being a part of that. And it's a privilege for me to be a part of it as well. Thank you.
Well, to continue with the thank you, as I look across the room, you guys are a tremendous encouragement to us. And it's our hope as we sit up here and have an opportunity to voice our observations when it comes to this important topic. We hope in some way that this is an encouragement to you. I've been at this job long enough to remember, I'm looking at Commander Toronto and my colleague Chief Smith, and we'd go to calls and you'd see families that were in great distress. And keepers of the peace, we would do everything that we could to resolve that. Sometimes it would result in an arrest. Sometimes, our toolbox wasn't what it is today to deal with those situations. And you'd leave and you'd look at your partner and you're like, how do you ever see that working out? We're going to be back. And then you would hope that somehow maybe family or someone else could get involved and do something long-term to interrupt what we started to see as a great potential for further violence. But the other part that you'd leave feeling was a certain emptiness that, how is this ever going to change? Can a cop ever make a difference in the life of a family and to do what we're sworn to do, and that is to protect and serve? And it's been over time now that I also learned something else, that any one group can't get it done. It takes a team. And in particular, when it comes to issues of domestic violence, if you expect law enforcement to get it done, we can do a piece. If we do some sort of other intervention, that's going to be a piece of it. If it's prosecution, if it's corrections, it's a piece of it. But the key thing that we're doing today is doing a physical demonstration that as you pull that string, we all can come together and we create a pretty impressive force. And it's dynamic and we get better at it each day. And I was reminded of that just the other day. We did a domestic violence sweep throughout the county, partnering with what started in Clackamas County, Oregon, approximately 11 years ago. And we had over 50 people out participating, knocking on doors from multiple agencies, including our U.S. Marshals and others. I mean, we had a broad spectrum of folks that had committed to helping Ramsey County and the other cities in Ramsey County, that we're going to go out and knock on doors and we're going to serve these warrants. We were able to hit 30% more addresses than we had. We were able to arrest twice as many people. And now after we'd knocked on the door, interestingly what happened, some said they turned themselves in the next day. And so it's with that, we want those perpetrators to know that we're not forgetting about them. We are coming after them. And people deserve justice, and we're going to continue in our pursuit to make sure that we do our part to have justice served. And so from that standpoint, our deputies are those that are acting on behalf of the courts and behalf of our citizens, serving those court orders. That's what we do. And we're happy to do that. We're happy to speed along that aspect of justice. And the other piece that we've been able to do, and we talked about what's happened regionally and ultimately nationally related to the Blueprint for Safety, very proud to say that Ramsey County, all of the chiefs in Ramsey County put their arms around the Blueprint for Safety, and that's been fully implemented in the county. And to be sheriff and to be side by side with chiefs that think in the same fashion, we can make a difference. We are making a difference, and I thank you all so much for your commitment to this very important initiative. And it's at this time I have the privilege of introducing my county board members. So Commissioners Reinhardt and Carter.
Thank you. My first comments here are going to be as a Ramsey County Commissioner. And I want you to know that the Ramsey County Board is fully committed to protecting victims, supporting children in violent homes, and holding perpetrators accountable for their violent actions. And County Attorney Choi and others up here have already talked about the great partnerships that we have in doing that. We have really stepped things up to try to make sure that when we're talking about a call to action for men, when we're talking about prosecution in the Special Victims Unit in St. Paul and Ramsey County, and taking that out into the suburbs as well. We're trying to get this message out with all of you, with all of our partners, as far and wide as we possibly can. And clearly you can tell that, County Attorney Choi has been on the national circuit talking about what we are trying to do here in Ramsey County and in Minnesota. And I'm very proud to be a part of that. The second voice that I want to put on is from many years ago. And I can tell you that in the 70s and 80s, when I was going through domestic violence in my own home, 2 young children, and trying to figure out what I was going to do and feeling pretty hopeless, because you get into a position, quite frankly, where you feel hopeless and that there's nothing that can be done. And it was Ramsey County Commissioner Bob Orth, who stepped up and said, Victoria, this is the resource that you need to give you the tools to no longer be a victim, but to be a survivor. And I know that a lot has changed, a lot more has happened to hold out that hope and to make sure that resources are available to people that are going through this. And I think that is absolutely wonderful. But it really makes a difference when you've got your local governments, your local police, the county attorney, the city attorneys, everybody working together. There is hope. Thank you. And I would like to introduce Tony Carter.
So simply a heartfelt thank you. I'm Tony Carter, and this is my district that the Western Police District is in. And I just want to thank all of you for coming out today. The work that you do is work that sometimes happens very much in private with people, individuals and families, including children, who are suffering through the circumstances of abuse and violence. And that work is being highlighted today by our being together in this room and saying to our community, to those who are suffering, you do not need to suffer alone. There are people who are partnering together and who will continue to look for you, to find you, and to support you and lift you up. This is a community concern. So thank you for so many years of coming together as a community. Yes, it requires a law enforcement response. Yes, it requires a justice response, and seeking for justice is so important. This requires a human response, the services that so many are needing, the trauma and needing to address the trauma that is the reason for so much abuse. You are rescuing people every day through your focus on partnering in this regard. So I simply want to say thank you to encourage you to continue to bind together in the way that you do and together with all of us, and to recognize that the bravest among us are the survivors. I am so thankful for the stories of that survivorship and look forward even to hearing that story today, as that is our goal: survivorship and strength and the building of a healthy community together. Thank you so very much.
So hello, my name is Amy Brunmone and I'm a city council member. I represent the 5th Ward, so not this area, but Como, the east side, the north end. And I know that I don't need to persuade anybody, but I have decided, when I was invited to speak here today, I decided to share an editorial I wrote last year, because last year was a particularly horrific year for residents in the area that I represent. So it's a bit recycled, but I think it's an important message. Just 7 days into 2013, St. Paul suffered its first homicide. At the scene, the police officer assured a neighbor, "Everyone is safe." It seemed hopeful, but what he actually meant was that the perpetrator was in custody. In fact, a woman was dead, and a baby 17 months old was abruptly left with no mother and a father facing a life sentence. Charges have now been filed in the horrific slaying of a 32-year-old woman, and the accused is her 34-year-old husband. Neighbors have expressed shock and sadness about this incredibly violent act committed against a gentle, affable young mother. In spite of initial concerns about the man's prior criminal record, I'm told the woman defended her husband as reformed, and that couple was at least somewhat accepted in the tight-knit Como community. More information has trickled out about the murder over the past few days. Each detail makes me less confident that everyone is safe. How could something so terrible happen in our community? How common is domestic violence? According to the Minnesota Coalition for Battered Women, 36 women and 23 children in Ramsey County were murdered as a result of domestic violence in the last 10 years. Annually, the St. Paul Police Department receives nearly 8,000 domestic violence calls for service, and more than 1,400 orders for protection are filed in the Ramsey County Court. The numbers are stunning. Domestic violence occurs across all socioeconomic boundaries and knows no racial preference. St. Paul and Ramsey County have excellent resources for victims, families, and even perpetrators, such as Bridges to Safety. Reaching out to help yourself or a loved one may be the act that prevents you or those you love from being hurt or even killed. Don't ignore your instincts. For some, the conversation quickly turned to, how could anyone marry a man like that? She should have known better, and why didn't she just leave him? It's easy to be critical, but we all know well the complex nature of human relationships. Victims don't want their relationships to end, they just want the abuse to end. According to the Domestic Abuse Project in Minneapolis, women stay in abusive relationships for many reasons, such as economic dependence, fear of being single mother, isolation from friends and family, concern about retaliation, guilt, embarrassment. The Domestic Abuse Project says that women feel so hopeless in their situation that they truly believe that they have no choices or options. We may never know how this young woman suffered, but it's heart-wrenching to think that she may have believed she had no options when supportive neighbors lived only steps away. It's a tragedy if she thought she had no choices in a city with an array of resources for women and children in crisis. Sadly, it's too late for her now. But domestic violence remains in our city. Please turn off violent shows on television. Don't accept jokes about violence. Teach children appropriate ways to deal with anger. Talk to one another. Make a phone call. Knock on a door. Trust your instincts. Call the police. Reach out for help. Be a friend. And repeat. Don't stop until everyone is safe. Thank you. I don't know why. I read it this morning and I choked up too, but so that's what I have to say, and I think I'm inviting Abby from Abby. Yes, welcome up. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being here today. As a grassroots domestic violence program, the St. Paul Intervention Project serves over 5,400 battered women, victims of domestic abuse, and children each year. Annually, we receive over 8,000 crisis calls. for services and support. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we provide crisis intervention and services to victims immediately following a violent incident. We continue to work with victims, their children, the families, and ensure they can move on forward and live free of violence in their own homes and neighborhoods. What we do is to successfully serve victims and end the cycle of violence. It's done in a concert with every person in this room and many more organizations beyond this wall. The Partnership for Domestic Abuse Services, also known as PDAS, whose members include Asian Women United of Minnesota, Casa de Esperanza, Family Wise Services, Out Front Minnesota, the Ramsey County Attorney's Office, Ramsey County Adult Protection, the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office, Workforce Solutions, the Domestic Abuse and Harassment Office, the City of St. Paul City's Attorney's Office, the St. Paul Domestic Abuse Intervention Project, the St. Paul Mayor's Office, the St. Paul Police Department, Southern Minnesota Regional Legal Services, Tubman, United Family Clinic, Women of Nations, and Women's Advocates, works beyond the Victim Service Center, Bridges to Safety. Bridges to Safety collectively serves over 1,200 victims each year. PDAS is committed to continuing and examining and address the unmet needs of victims, their children, and the community at large. In addressing those crucial needs, issues of mental health, the impact on children, and services for perpetrators are included in our multi-year holistic strategic plan to address domestic violence within our community. Beyond our city and county borders, the Minnesota Coalition for Battered Women, Breaking Free, Alexandria House, Praxis International, and the Domestic Abuse Project, just to name a few, further add to our resources and collective voice. Government support, private foundations, corporation donations, and individual contributions give us the crucial resources needed to continue this vital work. Each piece must fit together. Each person must play a role in our community's response to ending domestic violence. Thank you all for being here today.
Good morning, everybody. And before my official comments, real briefly, I just wanted to say Mahatma Gandhi said, to create change, you need to be the change. To create change, you need to be the change. And I am so proud of all of you that are in the audience, all of our partners that are here right now, because our partnership with the Blueprint for Safety is making a difference. And you do so with passion and compassion. I look at Mike Toronto, who was the commander of our sex crimes unit. Mike committed to domestic violence, and when he left the police department, worked with us through Praxis and other things because of his commitment, his passion for this work. And I could tell stories about many of you in this room. So again, to create that change, you, each one of you, have helped to make the change. And I want to thank you with that. Last week I was in Bloomington speaking at a national conference for Praxis, a rural conference with people from all over the country about our Blueprint for Safety. Simultaneously, the city of New Orleans was adopting our Blueprint for Safety because of the work and the partnerships of many of you in this room and talking with all of them. And I had an opportunity to talk to all those people from all over the country, and they were amazed by the work that we're doing here, but especially the advocates and the partners that we have here at the table, because people and systems don't always talk to each other, and that's what we've learned throughout this journey. So I want to thank you for that. Every year, the St. Paul Police Department responds to more than 9,000 domestic abuse-related 911 calls. Daily, our specially designed Family and Sexual Violence Unit, known as FSVU, works tirelessly with our system partners and the St. Paul Intervention Project advocates to effectively respond to victims and their families' safety needs. Throughout the nation, only 25% of all domestic crimes are reported. I want to say that again, only 25% are reported. Of that number, law enforcement is the first and often the only government system that victims will reach out to. But not here, my friends, because of the partnerships that we have and that we've developed and we continue to move forward. Even if they don't want to reach out to us as law enforcement officers, we have advocates, we have partnerships that they can go to first. As first responders and as the initial contact victims have with the justice system, our department feels a deep responsibility in setting the tempo and always raising the bar on how we respond to crimes of domestic violence. And not only with the critical goal of protecting the victims, but in creating a system that all victims will feel confident and safe reaching out to. St. Paul Police Department's Policy and Research and Grants Manager, Amy Brown Jensen, who's with us this morning, works as a team with St. Paul Intervention Projects, Bree Adams-Bill, another partner, and national experts, Praxis International with Julie Tilley, a great partner, and by the way, my neighbor as well. In analyzing, documenting, and implementing our Blueprint for Safety's best practices, and assisting in the coordination of each arm of the system to effectively respond to all domestic crimes. I was just recently at a conference over the weekend, and there were two chiefs here that I know very well. Chief of the New Orleans Police Department, Ronald Serpis, who I had an opportunity to talk to. Amazed by the work that we do here. Chief Tony Armstrong from Memphis, who Praxis uses me sometimes to go different places and talk to different chiefs, to let them know that the work that we're doing here, my friends, it's spreading like wildfire. And although we have more work to do, and there's too many incidents still of domestic violence, we are making, and you're making, such a large difference. And the results, though not always easily obtained, as you've heard all the speakers say, have been tremendous. Our Blueprint for Safety that we are diligently working to fully implement has been adapted by communities across the state and throughout the nation. And it is now a document that is being looked at in other countries as well. And in all of this, we, the members of the city and the county, Blueprint team, have played a direct role in changing the national response to the dangerous crime of domestic violence. We still have a ways to go, my friends, and it's been a long journey, but together we have all traveled well. I'm going to take a quick, brief opportunity to go off the script here for a minute, and I'm going to ask, because I want to give special recognition to Shelley Johnson-Klein. Shelley, please stand up. I'd like to have you stand here. And she'd kill me if I did this. You got to know Shelley, she'd really kill me if we did this, but I want to have her husband Michael and her brother Bobby come in. I'm going to read a citation here for Shelley's work, but I have to tell you something. You know what? Shelley is someone that I love because I, as a father, had a family member that was a victim of terrible domestic violence. In fact, I thought I was going to lose that family member. For a while, I thought I might end up going to prison. I wasn't a chief yet, but I was still a police officer. But when you have people that do terrible, horrific things to your family, and you're frustrated, especially me, in this line of work, it was difficult. And this woman next to me took care of that family member. And I love her for that. I just want to tell you. To Shelley, you have worked in the battered women's movement for over 3 decades. You have served as the executive director of the St. Paul Domestic Abuse Intervention Project since 1991. As director, you manage a multi-service agency that serves over 5,400 battered women each year. Your commitment to the women that SPIP assist is rooted in integrity, honor, courage, and hope. You have been instrumental in the provision of community and professional education on domestic abuse. You have created strong community and public partnerships to address the roots of domestic violence and ensure that critical programs and assistance are available to all victims. Under your supervision, SPIP has played a major role in the development of national domestic abuse protocols, victim resources, training, and educational materials. Your spirited and tenacious efforts to help battered women over a career spanning more than 30 years are beyond compare. Your energetic compassion is contagious. Your dedication inspires us and strengthens our relationship with all advocates. My sincere appreciation for your excellent performance as it reflects most credibly on you and the citizens of St. Paul. Your actions display the dedication we admire and are deserving of this recognition. And it is my sincere pleasure to present with you the Chiefs Award. Let's give Shelley a round of applause. We'll have time for some pictures later, but next, it is an honor that I introduce Tara here today. She has an amazing story. She's an amazing person. We want to thank you for being here. And also her advocate, Bree, to share her story with us.
Good morning, everybody. It's always interesting to follow the chief because he's so passionate and energetic, and what he just did was very emotional for me, and I'm sure many others in the room, but especially for SPIP. So, for those of us gathered here today who are a part of or a partner with Battered Women's Movement, it is clear how we perceive the word movement and our unflagging efforts to end domestic violence. The meanings of this word exemplify our critical work and collective vision: energy, crusade, a society, progress, change, and passage. It is a word that calls to us to never become complacent. For in the movement's infancy, when the first Battered Women's Shelter Women's Advocates opened 40 years ago, there was no doubt that that was only the beginning. For in order to truly end domestic violence, the complexity of its roots must be examined at every level of our society, and its impact responded to from every aspect of our being. Tara's story today will not only echo her remarkable strength as a woman, as a mother, as a survivor, and the very real dangers of this crime, but how we, as a movement, a community, partners, have worked together to ensure her story will also resonate the tremendous progress we have made. With that, I'm very honored to welcome Tara to speak next.
Hi, I'm kind of nervous, so if I mess up a little bit, please excuse me. When I was a child, I never experienced the feeling of being part of a family or community. I was the oldest of 5 children and lived from one foster home to another. My mother's very young life was plagued by drugs and a series of men who used and abused her in every way imaginable. When she gave birth to me when she was 14, her life horrors also became mine. When I was 13, my mother was brutally murdered in a domestic assault. As the only one of my siblings who never had a father, I was eventually moved in with my grandparents, who worked hard each and every day, never really recovered from the loss of my mother. It was a neighborhood I didn't fit into, and that's where I met Randall. At 15, he was 2 years older than me. My life mirrored many of his experiences growing up. He too had no one. He became the friend I never had. He understood the life I had come from and was strong, always protecting me from the rougher kids in the neighborhood. He was someone I could talk to, someone who cared. For the first time in my life, I wasn't alone, and I grew to love him more than I ever thought possible. For 2 years, we shared a deep friendship and became inseparable. When I was 15, Randall began pressuring me into becoming intimate with him, saying if I wasn't, he would leave me and he'd never come back. I was terrified to lose the only person I ever had in my life, and even though I wasn't ready, I slept with him. I became even more attached while he slowly became mean and more controlling. 3 months later, I became pregnant. He acted like he owned me. I had to let him know my every move, and sometimes I felt my every thought, for he was viciously jealous. I got used to keeping my eyes down so he wouldn't think I was looking at someone. If he thought I was, he would spit in my face, slap me, or yank me by my hair. I was always covered in bruises. I always felt trapped. I was 7 months pregnant. He became demanding that I slept with him in my grandparents' home. When I refused, he picked me up by my throat and slammed me on the floor. He punched me in my face over and over again, covering my mouth so I couldn't scream. My grandfather called the police. When they arrived, my nose was bleeding, my eye was swollen, my lip was split, I was covered in bruises, and I was beyond scared. They took Randall and dropped him off 2 blocks away from my grandparents' home. He immediately started calling me and threatening me. Every day he would call saying that Nobody wanted to be with me. Nobody would ever love me or the baby. I felt alone and guilty for shuttering him out in some way. I was afraid that if he found someone else and left me, that I would be alone forever and I'd be abandoned again. He never stopped telling me that I would turn out to be just like my mother, which always hurt. He came when our first child was born. I felt frightened and overwhelmed. For my whole life, I always wanted a family with a white picket fence. And I'd do anything I could to deserve that dream. I worked hard to raise my son, maintained all A's in high school, and to earn a living. Randall did very little to help, and the isolation and abuse always continued. Our friendship became one based on fear. Fear of being beat when I angered him, fear of my siblings and grandma being injured if I tried to leave them, fear of him taking my child away and never coming back, fear of being tortured or murdered if I ever asked for help. Randall was continuously in and out of jail due to his violence, mostly from police being called by others who heard or witnessed him beating me. I called twice, and the abuse was worse when he found out I did it. One time he handcuffed me to a table and beat me for hours. He made it clear that if I ever tried to get help or talk to the police, he would kill not only me, but my grandparents, my siblings, everyone in my family. At that point, he told me it wouldn't matter to him if he got caught. At 17, I was pregnant with our daughter. 4 months into my pregnancy, Randall, armed with a gun, came into my grandma's house, pushed me down, began to kick me in my stomach. His mother tried to stop him, but he beat her too. She managed to get me out of the house and called the police. He threatened the cops, saying that he would shoot them, but they surrounded the house and ended up arresting him. For 7 months, he was locked up. My daughter was born, and I received a scholarship to go to college. All that time, I knew he would get out. No piece of paper would stop him from coming after me. I never felt the police or anyone could help me. Over the years, when called to my house, some police officers accused me of liking the beatings, or sneered or even chuckled at me. They didn't understand what would happen to me if I ever cooperated. One time, while a cop was at my house with his partner, he handed me a note saying, "Just keep talking, but point to me where he's at. I will get him out of the house." I remember my eyes filling up with tears while pointing upstairs because I finally felt like someone understood. My life had become a living nightmare. I could never escape, but only try to make tolerable. I protected my children, but had to quit college. I was 90 pounds and I was drinking more than I should. One day, Randall came over angry. I had to leave work. Thankfully, I just dropped my children off at daycare. He began punching me and kicking me on every part of my body. He raped me and kept strangling me until I couldn't breathe. I tried to escape twice. The twice he caught me, he beat me even worse, if that's even possible. For 7 hours, I was tortured. I could no longer take it. I knew he was going to kill me. The pain was excruciating. At one point, he left the room and I grabbed a bottle of codeine on my nightstand. I took the whole thing. I was done. I had no more fight left in me. When Randall returned and saw me struggling to breathe, he did not help. He left me laying on the floor and ran out of the house. In my haze, I remember calling an older relative to say goodbye and to make sure that he let my children know how much I loved them. The police received a suicide attempt call. The first light team, which was 2 blocks away, recognized my address and responded to the call. All I remember from that point was a tall officer breaking down my door and the advocate holding my hand and telling me to hang in there and you were not going anywhere. I wasn't alone. I regained consciousness in the intensive care. The advocate was still there by my side. My left air pipe was punctured and my right was broken. My entire body was swollen and bruised. I would not tell anyone what happened to me or why I had taken the pills. I was terrified. There was no suffering or pain that could ever make me risk losing my children or my grandma. I knew what he was capable of doing, and there was no way I could escape. Randall had trained me not to talk to anyone, and I feel I could never let my guard down. The first light officer, Mike, came back to check on me. Him and Randall's probation officer visited my house many times before to see if Randall was violating his probation. I would never tell him anything, but he always seemed to come back. I came to trust my advocate. It was the first time in my life I knew someone was looking out for me, and in that darkest hour, scared and alone, I could tell her what I was feeling, what I was afraid of, and she never used it against me. She was really there for me, and I began to tell her everything. Another spit advocate helped my grandmother and got an OFP at the domestic abuse office against Randall. He would also hit her and take her money and threaten her. At this point, he couldn't come to where I was staying. My advocate contacted shelters and let me know of spaces available if I wished to go. I did not leave, but I knew that if I had to, I could. Smurls provided legal information to my advocate regarding Randall's relationship with me, my grandmother, and her home, which disputed all the information that I had been about his rights being there. Emergency funds were provided for lock changes and to help with bills and rent while I was healing. Randall was thinking I was working with the police. He called his probation officer to say he had taken some pills and squeezed my throat in an attempt to help me. His probation officer knew he had been flagged as a repeat chronic offender by flare-up team and called the officer to report his phone call and issue a warrant out for his arrest. While he was in jail, my advocate was in contact with the sheriff's office, who would ask to assure me that my phone was blocked and there was no way of him getting in contact with me. I began to trust the first flight officer. I still not want anyone else in my business, for it always made situations so much worse. But the officer told me that if I was the only cop I could trust and I needed help, I was to call him. And if not him, he would make sure that he'd have good police officers there to help me. The jury trial found Randall not guilty, and even though the county attorney lost and I could not help him, he said he would do it all over again because it was about justice, not a conviction. 3 days later, Randall was arrested for obstructing the legal process and disorderly conduct. Shortly after that, my grandmother reported that she thought Randall was in the neighborhood. A report was taken at the St. Paul Police Department and increased patrols all around my grandma's home. The next day, Randall called the first flight officer and threatened his life. The officer put out an alert for him to be arrested. Later that day, he was arrested 2 blocks away from my home. He was sent to prison for 29 months for a felony violation of the order. After all those years, I woke up one morning and I knew I was done with him. I could call for safety in my own neighborhood. I was a part of a community, and there were people out there that could help me. My advocate and police officer boosted my confidence. I didn't feel like I was alone in this war. My advocate and the St. Paul Intervention Project and my first light officer saved my life. I would not be here without them. I met a man whose name is James. He loves me and my children very much. We are married and expecting a baby in March. I don't have a white picket fence with James, but we have a porch, and I love that porch.
As we conclude, I just want to thank everyone for coming. Tara, for your courage to be with us, to tell your story. For all those that are helping Tara, the Taras of this community, to never have to live through what she has lived through, but to give her the strength to survive, to carry on, to prosper, and to ultimately get beyond the abuse, and have the courage to stand here. Let's give her one more round of applause. Thank you all for coming, and let's continue to do great work in this community.